that are driven by climate-related disasters. Part 2 of the 6th assessment of the International Panel on Climate Change Assessment, a report titled Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability, was recently released, and I'm sure many of you will have seen all of the news about that. It's 3,675 pages, 18 chapters, and 7 cross-chapters detail horrifically the powerful impact climate change is already having, affecting the lives and livelihoods of billions of people around the globe. Lead author David Rathall writes, "Climate change is rendering places uninhabitable. It is a complex problem, and it is already happening in many areas." He went on to detail the displacement of 4,000 people in Oregon wildfires in 2020, many of whom have migrated as they sought to rebuild their lives. Impacts of fires, of floods, of climate-enhanced pests and diseases of agricultural crops fall most heavily on the poorer developing countries and on the more vulnerable sections of society in wealthy industrialised societies. Rathall emphasises that vulnerability is defined by inequality, poverty, and existence on the political and economic margins of society without a voice. In order to address vulnerability, the IPCC report says it is necessary to make our societies, communities, and economies more equitable and more inclusive, with a seat at the decision-making table for those who've been left out. Can we partner with vulnerable people and communities to prepare and minimise forced migration, rehabilitation of coastal defences, improved water security, crop diversification, circular labour migration schemes? The report also addresses the adaptation gap. Many communities are unable to address and manage the risks brought by climate change, and they're likely to be forced from their homes and need places to go, ability to get there, and jobs, housing, healthcare and education when they do get there. Can we help with disaster preparedness and well-planned evacuation frameworks? Are migration pathways simple and secure? The report asks whether those in our better off places will be our best, compassionate, open-doored and open-hearted selves, or asks whether we'll close the door. Avoiding the destabilising effects of climate change, the report concludes, will only be possible with radical reduction in greenhouse emissions. And the window to holding change below 1.5 degrees is rapidly closing. But we can do it. We start by making it plain that we expect climate action now, at all levels of our lives, from our politicians and policymakers, from our corporations, and in our local communities and homes. And while we work with speed to reduce the risk, I pray we will work with open hearts to put in place mitigation, adaptation and migration processes to support those who bear the brunt of the impacts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Perry. There's so much that we know and so much that we don't know. And I think that's the frightening thing. One of the best things is for us to share the message. And so when we find out information and facts, share them in our normal conversation with everybody so that we as a whole community are people that educate each other. A terrible fact. Today there's an estimated 30 million UNHCR refugees around the world. 1 in 88 people on Earth are currently displaced from their homes by warfare, persecution, famine and/or environmental disasters. And over 80 million people plus the 10 million newly displaced Ukrainians. So today we hear from people who are very involved within our local community and in the wider world understanding of refugees. I welcome Anthea Falkenberg and Trevor, who are coming to speak to us about what's happening here in Adelaide, but also with facts around the world. Can you please welcome Anthea?
Good afternoon, and thank you for your presence here with us on Kaurna land today, where I'm grateful to live and to meet. I'm Anthea Falkenberg, a member of Adelaide Vigil for Manus, and Nauru, and beside me is Trevor Jones, also an active member. The Vigil was formed in September 2016 in response to continuing offshore detention of those who had arrived by boat coming to seek asylum in Australia, but instead were taken and held by force on remote islands in punitive conditions. Both of us travelled at various times to Manus Island, Papua New Guinea in support of them, and have continued to stand with the Vigil as a visible presence in Adelaide City each Friday evening and to provide clear and current information to the public. Last week was our Vigil number 281. We'd love it to end. We'll get to that. On this earth, where so many live in poverty and difficulty, asylum seekers are among the most marginalised. You'll notice there's a lot of overlap between what Perry said and what Trevor and I will say. That's because these issues are all interlinked. There are currently more than 84 million forcibly displaced people alive on this earth. This is the UNHCR's figure from mid-2021. This figure includes all adults of all ages and children.
48 million are internally displaced, living precariously in their country of origin due to conflict or violence. 27 million are refugees waiting for safe settlement. 4.5 million are asylum seekers waiting on recognition of their refugee status, hoping that that will bring them safe settlement.
The UNHCR's most recent resettlement statistic is for 2021, when 16,300 refugees went to their new home of resettlement. In the same year, nearly 8 times that number returned to the country they had originally fled.
Whilst wealthy countries such as Australia, the US, the UK, Canada and the EU quote their annual refugee quota figures with pride and often a claim of doing more than their share, the fact is that 85% of the world's refugees and asylum seekers waiting for resettlement are currently hosted in developing countries. Countries with much greater poverty and hardship, with the very least developed countries providing asylum for 25% of this total number.
Recently, we've seen a rapid response from these wealthier countries to those fleeing Ukraine, with pledges to provide aid and refuge. This is really heartening, but in comparison to responses to other crises being fled all around the globe, it is a striking anomaly.
As the climate crisis deepens, it will both increase the pressures that cause conflicts and also cause climate-induced displacement, and the numbers of displaced people will increase. At the same time, we can see that the response of many governments is to harden their borders. Australia being a prime example, now touting its punitive detention model to other countries.
As the Vigil for Manus and Nauru, our core focus is on those asylum seekers who between July 2013 and early 2014 were taken by force to the small remote tropical islands of Nauru and Manus in Papua New Guinea. Our vigil will end when all of this group are safely resettled. They have already paid dearly in advance for that hope of future resettlement, some having now given almost 9 years of their life and an incalculable toll on their physical and mental health, and that of their loved ones waiting to be reunified with them.
Our government has for years attempted to label their arrival on our shore by boat as illegal, and a threat to Australian security and values. This has never been other than political opportunism, and sadly, there have been votes to be had for it. Now it seems there is fresh political expediency in accepting New Zealand's offer of resettlement for 450, and in the past 4 days, finally releasing the last, bar maybe one, of those that had been medevaced to Australia and held in mentally damaging indefinite guarded detention in Australia, released to now live on temporary visas in the community. After 9 years, it is suddenly safe to do these things? This question has been posed numerous times to a number of government figures over the last few days, and there has been nothing but bluster in response.
Of the original Manus and Nauru hostages, there remain 217 people offshore, 112 on Nauru and 105 in Papua New Guinea. Interviews for Australia and New Zealand's resettlement agreement, just recently accepted by Australia, have already begun on Nauru. In Port Moresby, the UNHCR has also begun interviewing those who have expressed interest in settling in New Zealand, which is an arrangement outside of that between Australia and New Zealand, and is between New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, as Australia has ceased any responsibility for those remaining in Papua New Guinea.
There are over 100 in Australia, PNG and Nauru in the process of being privately sponsored, to go to Canada, and a small number have already started their new lives there as permanent residents. Additionally, around 350 are still in process for settlement in the USA, with only 250 places left to be filled of their quota.
With 1,100 now living, of this group, now living on temporary or no visa in the Australian community following their release from locked detention. There is still no clear plan providing permanent resettlement for all. It must be noted that as a result of this piecemeal approach to avoiding our country's responsibilities to these people, many families have been broken up both needlessly and heedlessly. We have hope that this will not be a long drawn-out process to get resettlement for everybody, taking more years from the lives of these people who remain hostage to Australia's politics until such time as they are resettled. So far, there is no guarantee of that. In addition to the former Manus and Nauru political prisoners, for that is what they are, there are approximately 30,000 other long-term asylum seekers in Australia, also living for many years on temporary visas while waiting for their cases to be resolved. This halted process has prevented family reunification, left their families in danger overseas, and limited their access to education and work opportunities. Lives uncaringly stunted, all to underscore a political point: our precious sovereign borders, where we do the deciding as to who, how and where people may arrive. Hint: wings good, water, just stay off the water. Additionally, directly impacted by Australia's refugee policies, there are, as of January 2002, 13,700 refugees, many from Afghanistan, living precariously in Indonesia, awaiting resettlement. We hope that this will happen sooner rather than later, but so far it's very slow going. Thank you all for your caring hearts and your ongoing willingness to help and advocate for those in need. There is much need.
Just on a personal note to finish, on Palm Sunday, Christians remember Jesus humbly entering Jerusalem. And Jesus said there were 6 things that he will be looking for when he returns again, and foretold that he will say, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." And when people say they don't remember doing those things, Jesus will reply, "I tell you, Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Refugees around the world, and right here in Adelaide today, so much need this help. We can't help all, but let us together help all that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Can I have our singers come up, please? This is a song that we're going to sing, and if you can pick up the chorus, please feel free to join in. We'd love you to. It was written for the 8 years rally for the people held on Manus and Nauru last year and sung at that rally. We expect we'll be singing it again at the 9 years rally this year, which will be on the Sunday closest to 19th of July 2022, and we're having a meeting after this to start organising that. So we hopefully have a few people coming. Ariane? Any other Vigil people? Carol, coming up to help sing this?
I don't think I can get up that way.
Thank you. So they'll stand over there.
Yeah, well, just slowly, but slowly, 3, 4, 5. These are very, very quick steps.
As they come up, I'll just play a bit of an intro of the chorus, so you can, or the whole tune, so you can hear it.
Thank you so much to the Adelaide Vigil and to all your work that you've been doing in the background for so many years on behalf of all of us. I think one of the wonderful things about events like this is that we meet people who are very committed to different areas of support and justice seeking. I really thank you all for that effort that you put in when others of us have our eyes focused elsewhere. And the wonderful thing about the whole people of the community is that each of us brings some special gift and some special focus of our own. Everyone has something of importance to say, and we must listen to each other and learn from each other. And today is one of those days. I'd like to introduce to you Lee Newton, who is an awesome human being and also a fantastic musician. Lee's been writing music for many areas across our community for many, many years. One of those big numbers, isn't it, Lee? But his music lives on, and his message is always peace and justice. We hear from Lee.
Let's see if my music gets blown right. You see, you take
Hello, good afternoon. I have a little biography of our illustrious leader, and I wrote a verse last night. I had to update it. Oh. The man in the mask is no fool. Sets the agenda, fashions the roads, changes position like a carpenter's tools. The man in the mask is no fool. The man in the mask goes to church, but he's slippery and scheming. He hectors and smirks. Likes you to notice his bright spangled cross. The man in the mask goes to church. When did democracy fail us? Has it been 50 years or one day? We're out on the ledge, and way down below us the bells of democracy lay. Where's the finest of ties? That's his way. Like some thug in the courtroom, come sentencing day, he's confident nothing will stand in his way. The man wears the finest of ties with a suit. Man out the front has no clothes. There's nothing but bluster wherever he goes. The lineup of promises are just puffs of smoke. The man out the front has no clothes. When did democracy fail us? Has it been 50 years or one day? We're out on the ledge, way down below us the bells of democracy lay. The company man is a Scrooge, but if your electorate is liberal, there's car parks for you. There's money for fossils and fuel subsidies too. Regardless, just chaos ensues. When did democracy fail us? Has it been 50 years or one day? We're out on the ledge, way down below us. The bells of democracy lay. Let's try that chorus. When did democracy fail us? Has it been 50 years? Has it been 50 years or one day? We're out on the ledge. We're out on the ledge, way down below us. Way down below us. Bells of democracy. The bells of democracy lay. Now, if this song was a novel, and J.K. Rowling was writing it, she would probably put in something about Scotty's childhood. So I reckon I'm pretty close on this little verse. Scotty's been lying to Mum. He's taken the lollies, and Scotty says yum. He's learning the dark art of lies finely spun. Scotty's been lying to Mum. Back to verse 1. The man in the mask is no fool. He sets the agenda and fashions the rules. He changes position like a carpenter's tools. The man in the mask is no fool. Thank you. Now, last week, a friend from Wisconsin sent me a little SMS and he said, it's a good hook, and it was attached to a YouTube video. And it was a song that John McCutcheon and Tom Paxton had written together. Those of you of my era will recognise those names. Tom Paxton wrote a whole stack of big folk songs in the 1960s. I know it's getting back, isn't it? But I just had to learn this song, but I've got my cheat sheet just in case. When I open the paper, check out the news on TV, it's pictures of buildings exploding are all that I see. There in the midst of the horror, the blood and the bone, are the Davids against the Goliaths, defending their homes. I am a Ukrainian now, I will stand and I will not bow. Half-world away, but somehow I am a Ukrainian now. That's the chorus. Here we go again. I am a Ukrainian now. I will stand and I will not bow. Half world away. Half world away, but somehow I am a Ukrainian now. I am the Muscovite protesting out in the streets. I am the rabbi, learning to pray with my feet. I am the soldier who used to dance in the ballet. I am the father, sending my family away. I am Ukrainian now, I will stand and I will not bow. Half-world away, yet somehow I am a Ukrainian now. The world that once was so big now seems so small. An attack on the freedom of one is aimed at us all. Sometimes the picture before you is just too hard to see, but I can't look away like the coward that I used to be. While others are mounting resistance and risking it all, how can we stand by impassive when we hear the call? I am Ukrainian now, I will stand and I will not bow. Half world away, yet somehow I am Ukrainian now. We are thankful for governments that open their borders in care to the souls of Ukraine, whose cries even now fill the air. Do they make a distinction for contrasting color or creed? They throw them in prison, no matter the terror they flee. We are Ukrainian now. We will stand and we will not bow. Half world away, yet somehow we are Ukrainian now. We are Ukrainian now. We will stand and we will not bow. Half world away, yet somehow we are Ukrainian now. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Wonderful words, fantastic sense of where we should be and what we should do. Someone who has not bowed to political pressures in many ways, who has stood his ground and maintained an ethical way of management through so many roles, is our next speaker. The Honourable Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold, AO, was formerly a member of the South Australian State Parliament, Cabinet Minister, and of course, our Premier. Subsequently, he has been Chief Executive Officer of Anglicare SA after 11 years with World Vision International. In this role, Lynn was responsible for overseeing South Australia's largest non-government agency, promoting justice, respect, and fullness of life for all. He is now an ordained priest in the Anglican Church and ministers at St Peter's Cathedral, with a special focus on ministry to the City of Adelaide and in encouraging dialogue in public issues from Christian perspectives. Please let us welcome the Honourable Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold.
Naidamane, Nadlu Tampendi, Ganama Yuna, Yeta Matanya Wamatara Nyako, Ganama Yunako, Yatako, Taikarinda Tawila. We acknowledge the Kaurna people and their spiritual relationship with the land as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region. We acknowledge their living culture, heritage and beliefs. Omar Khayyam, in his Rubaiyat, wrote, "In agitation I was brought to birth and learned nothing from life but wonder at it. Reluctantly we leave, still uninformed, why in the world we came, or went, or were." These bleak words from Robert Graves's translation of the famous work certainly seem to resonate when we look at the troubled, fractured world around us. Yet there is something in us that rebels against such a fatalistic view. That something is the divine that reaches out to humanity in a spirit of reconciliation, calling humanity to a place we might call God's peaceable kingdom. A place where we are told in the book of Isaiah, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Now, those words appear on the steps facing the United Nations headquarters in New York, and they are symbolic of the desire of the nations of the world, after the conflagration of 2 world wars and many other conflicts, to find new ways to solve our problems. But more than just etching words into stone, those uniting nations had sought peace rather than war. However, in the decades which followed, there was anything but peace, with both hot and cold wars raging. There has been continuous conflict in various parts of the world, and indeed, as we stand here today on a very pleasant autumn day, the sounds of war have been ringing out for years now in many places. Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, Myanmar, West Papua, amongst others. And then there has been the war in Ukraine, which has burst upon us this year. Rather than having beaten swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks, our world seems to be sinking ever deeper into a vortex of violence. Sadly, the response of many is no more than, so what? However, your presence here today, on this Palm Sunday, is an affirmation of your desire to say, peace be with you, and to mean it for all humanity. Gathered here today in this multi-faith event, we have walked for peace. Rather than being in a place of worship, we have symbolically walked through God's sacred world by pilgrimage here in our city of Tantanya, the place of the red kangaroo. We walk from Tatanyanga, Victoria Square, towards Karawinapilla, the River Torrens, and back. Back in 2016, Katrina Kalapina Power spoke about the significance of the Chilbuki story in the Ghana Dreamtime, and focused on that story's emphasis on Chilbuki's responsibility to do the right thing, to protect animals, to protect boundaries, to respect neighbours, as well as to value all life, animal and human. That had been at an exhibition sponsored by the Abraham Institute called the Golden Rule Exhibition, which brought together many different faiths, exploring the meaning of that dictum, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And all those different faiths spoke of the rule's place in their own traditions, and as a result, found resonance with each other in the theme. Here, today, we have come together in the spirit of that golden rule, not only because we know of its inherent worth, but also because we know how much the world, a largely secular world, desperately needs that worth to be proclaimed. Rabindranath Tagore wrote, "Dream deep, for every dream precedes the goal." Dream deep, for every dream precedes the goal. But if that dream is poisoned by the world's call for survival of the fittest, the race of the swift, the excess of individualism, or the power of the despot, the belief that might is right, then that dream would turn into a nightmare. Will we contest that nightmare? Will we seek in the scriptures and traditions of our own faiths those messages which proclaim harmony, fairness, and having found them, will we loudly proclaim them? The Buddha said, "Those who attempt to conquer hatred by hatred are like warriors who take weapons to overcome others who bear arms. This does not end hatred, but gives it room to grow. While Baha'u'llah wrote, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable until its unity is firmly established." In the Quran we read, "Paradise is for those who curb their anger and forgive their fellow men." Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." When he said this, Jesus had echoed Leviticus from the Torah, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself." All those wonderful, pacific words from sacred scriptures demand two things of us. First, that we believe them, knowing, not hoping, that they are a message of divine power. But second, that we understand that they are also a specific call to each of us to become its ambassadors. In Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he wrote, "God has committed us to the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us." The civil war in Yemen has been raging for 8 years now. 100,000 have died in that conflict, and 85,000 are thought to have perished from starvation, and 4 million people became refugees as a result. Ethiopia has been racked by internal conflict for the past 4 years, following long episodes of civil and military unrest over previous decades. The toll, as in all such conflicts, falls heavily on civilians. The United Nations agency has reported, for example, that in 2021 alone, some 26,000 women were subjected to rape, victims of an odious and intentional weapon of war. While in Syria, that is now 1 year into its second decade of a civil war, nearly 14 million people have been made refugees and 400,000 killed since its start. And I know that other appalling statistics can be quoted from Myanmar and West Papua as well, through the long struggles that they have had. What did we say about all that? What do we say about these devastating human tolls? Whether we spoke or were silent, this year we have all seen violence unleashed in Ukraine by the bullying tactics of a major power against a smaller neighbour. Many of us marching here today also marched half a century ago when, in the Vietnam War, another major power had led a coalition of attack against a smaller country. We marched then because we knew that conflict was wrong. We could not remain silent in the face of that aggression and all the suffering it caused. So what does all that require of us today? Prayer, of course, but also action. We face a groaning world aching for peace and equity, so let us not be silent to that world about the great messages of reconciliation which our religious traditions proclaim. Let our voice be more than just words of comfort to our own troubled selves. Let them be a proclamation to others about how peace building not only may happen, but could and should. War is not a means to an end. It is an end to life. Over this past 24 hours, Volodymyr Zelensky, ever seeking a diplomatic solution, has said, We have to fight, but fight for life. You can't fight for dust where there is nothing and no people. That's why it's important to stop this war. Commenting on this, a friend of mine, Shaka Dolak, has said, hopefully the world will supply machinery to turn the rubble from buildings into road rubble and melt down the metal from Putin's tanks to reuse. But deaths on both sides are crushing for families of each side. And those lives cannot be recycled. As you go home today, may I encourage you to consider how you, individually or collectively within your fellowships, may actively speak peace in the face of violence and war. Mari Nabudni Yanja Yatanga, Vilyanini Yatanga. May we walk together in harmony in a spirit of reconciliation.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We've heard such fantastic speeches, some statistics that are shocking and some outcomes that are just unimaginable here in our safe space. May we not bow to injustice. May we stand strong, and may we be people of action with voices that are strong and loud. May we say things with love, but actually emboldened, be able to step out into spaces where other people are too afraid to speak out too. Thank you for attending today. Before we leave, I would like to say a very big thank you to the organising team for today across our many traditions. I thank also Jeff, who's been doing the tech off his own back, and all the skills and things that he's brought to a very difficult space. Thank you, Jeff Hurst. I thank our musicians that have given us their time and their skills. And I thank especially my daughter that's been pushing me around in a wheelchair because I've stuffed my back up. So please, I hope that you have a wonderful evening, and I hope tomorrow we are refreshed in our determination to be peacemakers and justice seekers here in Adelaide and beyond, across Australia and into the wider world. So thank you. Go in peace.